Okay, guys, welcome back. Thanks for watching. I told you we were coming back again with more this week because we're coming up on the Easter, and I really wanted to get you this information. This is a lot. I'm sort of out of breath because I've been sort of running through how much I've got to say, how fast I've got to say it. And this is about the third time I've started this video because this is a lot and I've got to go through it fast. I am just now realizing that I've worn this shirt in about 4 other videos. So now you know what is my favorite shirt out of all my closet. This may be one of my favorites. Of course, it never makes it in my closet because I wear it and it goes right back into circulation. But anyway, so before I get too far into this, I want to say thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the comments that have been people been making. I had someone in my Sunday school class comment and say this was great. I thanked them, and they said, "Hey, no thanks. We're having a good time doing this." I said, but yeah, but it's cool. But it's good to have new friends and new friends who also take an interest in what you're doing. So that was really cool. I do appreciate that, and all of you as well that have been watching. I've had old family members, old family friends, cousins, aunts, old high school friends, new friends, people from church, just all sorts of people that, like I said, just good friends, and I appreciate you being there. Any comments that you could make would be great. I do appreciate those. They always make me feel like, hey, look, I know we got something going on here. But also, if you want to take the time, any prayer requests you have, please send those over. I would love to pray with you and for you in whatever circumstance or situation you're in. Also, I asked for any questions you have, any things you thought that I might be able to cover. I had one guy do that, and I told him, I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in that field, but if there's something, if it's something I can cover, I will do my best to do so and help you see what you're wanting answers on." So, with that being said, let's get into this. This one is the one that talks about all that history that everybody says, there's no evidence of Jesus outside of the Bible, and I don't believe the Bible. We've talked about how foolish that notion is anyway already. But today, we're going to talk about all the evidence that's in the Bible. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 5, not 10, but 12. How do you do 12? 12 different writings outside the Bible from that time frame. Now, we got to talk a little bit about history first. One, in ancient history, anything that is documented is usually hundreds of years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after the actual event. The Gospels were written within 10, 20, 30 years, some of them. I believe even closer. I just believe that we're being generous by dating them that way, just to be conservative so people don't attack that. I think is what we're doing. These writings here that today I'm pointing because I've got notes on this beside the screen here as well, because so if you see paper rattling, it'll be me because there's just so much to cover. And I had to I'm going to write this down because I'm going to forget. I can usually throw this off the top of my head, but when I'm filming, I'm a little skittish. But anyway, so in history, time is not as crucial as it is today. We don't have video. They didn't have video. They didn't have audio recording. They didn't have printing presses. So for something to be written 100 years later or 200 years or 300 years later, that's common in antiquity. And no true historian doubts writings just because they're written, several hundred years after the fact. Also, if I'm writing a history book today, if I write a history book of 9/11 in New York, I'm only going to be able to talk to people who saw it and write down what they saw because I wasn't there. I didn't see it. So I'm writing down eyewitness testimony from someone else. If I'm writing a history of the American Revolution, I'm only going to be able to write down what I read from other people, what other people wrote down, because I can't go ask anybody, what was it like? I can only go by them. So we have several people today that were that way. They wrote about what other people wrote. They referenced what other people wrote. Historians value that. This is not something you say, oh, well, we don't know. We didn't get firsthand. You can't say that because if that's the case, you're going to have to discount all of antiquity, and that's some nonsensical notion. Many times, also, history is not just for somebody who's sitting there writing down. I'm going to write down what happened. Sometimes it's letters from other people, and you're reading those letters, and that lets you know what's going on. Or legal documents of what happened during the time. So ancient history is different than somebody just sitting down and let me write what happened today, because that's not always the case. So that's what happened in these things. A couple other things you need to know. When you hear somebody say a date like 116 CE or 116 AD, that's the same thing. CE means common era. AD means Anno Domini. It's not what I was raised to believe. When I was a kid, it was BC was before Christ, AD was after death. But that's not true, because BC before Christ, after death would be like 30-something years later. And so we'd have a span of time that didn't get counted in that. So that you can't. So really, it means Anno Domini means after God came, basically. So before Jesus, that way you can have a year zero. So understand, when I say something's 116 AD, the dating we put on the crucifixion is around 30 AD. So we're talking about something that happened something that was written less than 100 years after the crucifixion. So just remember that number, 30 AD, and then everything from there. I'm not going to go into too many details here because there's just not enough time. So I'm not going to say this person was born in this place and lived in this city and blah, blah, blah. I'm really just going to talk about this person and what they said about Christ or Christians. And then last of all, if I say first century, second century, third century, I want you to understand that a lot of people get confused. When they say first century, they think 100. Second century, they think 200. That's not the way it works. The first century was from 0 to 99, because that was a century. So when we hit 100, we had completed the first century. So during the 100s, we were in the second century. So when we got to 199, we completed the second century. Does that make sense? So if somebody says second century, you're talking about the 100s. Somebody's third century, we're talking about the 200s. So when somebody says that the Bible wasn't even written until the 4th century, they're talking about the 300s, and they usually talk about Constantine, they're talking about St. Jerome, and that's not true at all. That's just when some of the things started compiling, when Constantine asked Jerome to get all of the books of the Bible together. Not the same thing as when it was written. Different date, different time. So let's get into them. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one out first. Josephus, that's the one everybody says, that's the only one you got. He's a Jewish historian, not the only one we got, but he's a Jewish historian. He wrote two different things, two different references. One of them is kind of questionable because it is believed that some Christian was recopying him and added to it, because it says things like, the man Jesus, if he can be called a man, blah, blah, blah. And so, perform miracles and he was the Messiah, something like that. And that was sort of out of the nature of how Josephus had been writing. So it's a little questionable. But if you pull out the things he did say, Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate during the reign of Caesar Tiberius, those are facts that Josephus is pretty much credited with, but not the lauding of Jesus there. So a lot of people say, see, that can't be true. That can't be trusted. Historians trust those fact pieces, and they pull out the sensationalism when they talk about Josephus as a historian. There's one that is undisputed, and that is the reference to James, the brother of Jesus, being unlawfully executed. Those are the words that Josephus references. And of course, James, as we know, was the half-brother technically of Jesus, because Joseph was his father. And that was in between 93 and 94 AD. Okay, so 60 years after the crucifixion. Very close, very close. Then in 116 AD, Tacitus, a Roman senator, was writing about the burning of Rome that happened July 18th of 64 AD. Nero, what Tacitus says, Nero falsely blamed the Christians who were named after their leader, Christus, who was put to death by Pontius Pilate, and during when he was the governor of Judea during the reign of Caesar Tiberius. The thing about Tacitus is if in his writings, if something was questionable, he would say, this is questionable. This may or may not be true. I'm not really sure. He would put that caveat on there. He doesn't say anything about this with here. He also talks about how Nero, the executions were great, were just mighty, just horrible things, just horrific. He talks about the burning of the Christians. He talks about feeding them to dogs. He talks about crucifying them as well. Nero he describes Nero as a really rough guy. But one last thing is he made reference to the Christians after the crucifixion, um, believing in a what he called a mischievous superstition. Now, most historians believe that what mischievous superstition was the believing in that Jesus rose again, because they really nobody can think of what other kind of mischievous superstition they could have been referencing there. I'm going to pull this paper over from anything because I can't see the date on that because it's behind the phone that I'm filming with. And then, okay, so in 122 AD, that was 116 AD, Tacitus, 122 AD, Suetonius is a writer, and he writes about Claudius expelling the Christians from Rome in 49 AD. Remember, 30 AD crucifixion, 49 AD, Claudius expelled the Christians from Rome because there was such a big uproar over Chrestus. Okay, he talks about Chrestus there with an E, Chrestus. Not the other one was Christus. This is Chrestus. Now that expulsion is referenced in Acts 18, the first part of the chapter that Luke writes about Paul running into Aquila and Priscilla, who have been expelled from Rome because all Jews were sent out of Rome because of all the uproar that was being caused there. Claudius sent them out. He talks about also Christians believing in a mischievous superstition once again. But one thing I want to cover there, we talked about Tacitus calling Jesus Christus, and Suetonius calling him Chrestus. One's I, one's E. That's just the spelling issue there. No historian sees that as a different person. If you might get some YouTube and internet hacks who are saying, "Oh, see, that's proof of that wasn't the same person. They're not talking about Jesus Christ." No historian thinks that. And if you're making that argument, you're making the argument from the kiddie pool. That's study more, and you'll see that that's what really they're talking about there. So if you get somebody who makes that argument, they haven't really dug in. Historians don't believe that that's a different guy. So if you hear that, don't worry about it. 112 AD, Pliny the Younger. Yes, that's that's how he was known because, yes, there was a Pliny the, yes, elder. That's right. But he's writing a letter to Trajan because he was sitting in a trial against some Christians who had been pulled in because they were singing to Christ as a god. They were making oaths to live godly, and they met together regularly, which I'll tell you in a little bit why it was a problem. Trajan writes a letter back, so that's two different documents, writes a letter back and says that he did good, that the way he handled it was fine, but that any other Christians he pulls in, if they turn from their ways, they are not to be punished. So he does reference those two things. The issue is Trajan didn't say, who? What are you talking about? So if Christianity wasn't developed until Constantine in 300 AD, then Trajan should have said, Pliny, younger, older, whoever you are, who are you talking about? We haven't heard about no Christians. What are you talking about? So that would have been, that's evidence there that everybody knew about Christians. It was a common thing. They were not surprised to talk about Christians. In 41 AD, this is early, right there, 30 AD, 41 AD, right? This is referencing to that. Cassius Dio, he makes out a decree that Jews should stop meeting. Now, the synagogue continued, so he clearly wasn't talking about Jews shouldn't be meeting in a synagogue. He must have been talking about other meetings outside of that. And you have to remember that in 41 AD, they weren't differentiating between Jews and Christians because all the Christians at that point were Jews. They hadn't really expanded out into the Gentiles. They were working towards that. But in 41 AD, pretty much all the Christians were Jewish converts. So when he makes an edict that Jews are not supposed to meet separately like that, like from the synagogue, then he's probably talking about the Christians, which goes back to Pliny the Younger, who was arresting Christians because they're meeting when they're not supposed to, apparently. Now this one we don't have the exact date on this guy. He lived from 73 to 200 AD. His name is Mara Bar Serapion. He writes a letter to his son talking about 3 different wise teachers who were put to death and the consequences the people faced after putting them to death. He talks about Pythagoras and Socrates, and both of those, he said the people suffered after what they'd done. But the thing is, he references the wise king of the Jews. Now, Jesus was never officially the king of the Jews, but had been referenced by many people as a king of Jews. And of course, the Christians might have been calling him that. And so he may have heard that term. But the thing is, he also references at that point, says, and look, after that happened, they were sacked in 70 AD by Rome, who destroyed them and destroyed their temple. There was no other wise king that the Jews put to death, other than possibly Jesus. So he doesn't say Jesus. He just says the wise king of the Jews. So you can say, well, that's not enough. That's not enough. Okay, fine. But you put it in all the other evidence. This is some strong circumstantial evidence right there. Another one, I don't have the exact date on him, but he lived between 129 to 200 AD, was Claudius Galenus. He makes references to followers of Moses and Christ. That's all. He doesn't really say much about it. And then 170 AD, a political satirist, Lucian, writes about Christians. He's mocking them, and he talks about how they worshipped their crucified sage, and they made an oath to live godly, and he also refers them to as Christians. This one is the Babylonian Talmud. The next one here is the Babylonian Talmud. Now this is many authors. This is several things written together, but it's in the Talmud, which was written anywhere from 70 to 500 AD. Most historians put this writing between 70 to 200. I put it closer to 200 myself, and I'll tell you why in a little bit, because it makes a reference to on the eve of the Passover, the day before Yeshu, the Hebrew version of the name Jesus, was hanged for sorcery and insurrection. But he talks about how for 40 days, the night before, the town crier went through the streets that, Yeshu will be stoned and he will be hanged for what he's done and the things he's done. And that there's no reference anywhere of that happening. That's the reason I put this at a much later date, because it gives enough time for the legend to grow and to get more, the story to get exaggerated more. But skeptics jump on this part where it says that Yeshu was hanged. He wasn't hanged. He was on a cross, so which this can't be. But that's definitely arguing semantics, because Galatians 3:13 referenced him being hanged on a cross. Luke 23:39 referenced him being hanged. We talk all the time about Jesus being hung on a cross. So this is not, to use the word hanged or hung is not a stretch to say that's still talking about the same thing. That's if you're jumping on little pieces like that, once again, you're swimming in the kiddie pool of historical knowledge. That's not a good argument to follow. Anybody that does that with you, they need to study. When you got all these other guys and they're going to jump on, well, it says hang there, so that's not talking about the same guy. It's the eve of the Passover, and Yeshu, which is Hebrew version of Jesus. Yeah. So anyway, these next two are kind of fun ones. This is 50 AD. Remember, 30 AD, 50 AD. Thallus is writing. Now the issue is we don't have the writings of Thallus. What we have is Julius Africanus, who, I'm not sure the date he wrote this, but he died in 185 AD. So during the 100s, probably the late 100s, because he was probably writing in his latter years, he makes reference to Thallus writing about a total solar eclipse during this time, at the crucifixion, during the reign of Caesar Tiberius, which of course was a crucifixion. And in Luke 23, 44 and 45, it references that the skies went dark during the crucifixion. And a solar eclipse is a historical thing that people write about. Thallus wrote about this in 50 AD. Julius Africanus references him, just like I talked about before about people writing history. People write about what other people wrote about, unless they were there, which they weren't. But this is referenced again by Phlegon, who was writing between 80 and 140 AD. Once again, I don't have the exact dates because they didn't date their documents. I wrote this on such and such date. Some things we have because we know what they were doing. We know when they lived. We know when they died. We know where they were when they were writing. But this one is 80 to 140 AD. The guy's name is Phlegon, and he references a solar eclipse He references earthquakes. He also references that Jesus made many predictions that came true. Like he predicted that he would, you know, be put to death on a cross. He predicted that the temple would be destroyed. In essence, he predicted that. To some people's mindset, that's what he was referring to when he was referring to his body. But this is in Matthew 27, where it talks about the eclipse. But it talks mainly there about the rocks and the stones and the tombs cracked open and the earth shaking. All of this happening, once again, during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. So all of that is that. That's 12 guys, okay? So I want to go over quickly because I'm way overdue here. This is 20 minutes in, and I really don't want to keep you guys too long. I usually try to keep these around 10 or 15 minutes. But from what these are, I'm going to do a list of what we know from those writings. 1, he existed as a man. 2, he was personally known as Jesus. 3, he was also known as Christ or Christus, whatever. He had the name Christ. He had a brother named James who was put to death for his belief in him. He won over many Jews and Greeks because that's referenced. The Jewish leaders were not crazy about him. That's why they put him to death. Pilate rendered that decision for the execution. That execution was carried out by crucifixion. It happened while Pilate was governor of Judea and while Tiberius was Caesar. A superstition arose after the crucifixion of something about Jesus. He was worshipped as a god. They sang song to him as a god. He taught his people to live rightly, to live godly lives. Many Christians died at the hands of leaders like Nero because they insisted on their beliefs. And that there was an eclipse and earthquakes at the time of the crucifixion. That's a lot of information to get outside of the Bible. So when people try to say, I don't trust the Bible, fine, don't. Trust Roman historians. Now you can say, but this doesn't say that he was God. This doesn't say that I need him for salvation. No, it doesn't. It supports the other teachings, though. Like I said in my last video, which if you didn't see it, it was 2 days ago posted. It'll be dated if you want to go back and watch that one. If you're going to say, I believe Jesus was just a wise teacher, I don't believe all that other stuff, then what you're saying is that he was a wise teacher, and thousands of people followed him all over, and he was crucified for being a wise teacher, and people believed in him so much that they were willing to die for him as a wise teacher, and that's it. Not that he did anything else. Not that he performed miracles. Not that he had risen from the dead. These people were following for the show of the miracles. So it's just a question. It's a questionable thing to stop and say, I'm only going to believe that he was a wise teacher. Okay, fine, believe that, but then look at all these other historians who reference that he was killed and that people did worship him as a god, and that he didn't just teach wise things, and that these other things did occur. You put all those together, and then you realize also that the 4 Gospels were written just as eyewitness testimony. They didn't know they were writing the Bible. I've said that many times over. They didn't know they were writing the Bible. They didn't know that later on somebody was going to put it all into one book. They were just writing what they saw. So, had it not been put in that book, would you believe it still? Would you believe it as a historical document like these other things? It is not written in the form of mythology or fiction. You have to study literary styles as well when you're studying history. Some things are written as a fictional mythology story. They'll say, so-and-so was walking down the road and ran into a rich man. Or they'll say, so-and-so was walking on this date during the reign of this person down this road, heading to this town, and he ran into this person who said this. The exactness in historical documentation is different than the way mythology is written. The Bible is not written like mythology, not in the New Testament. There are some stories in the Old Testament that sound like they may be poetry and story. I still believe that's just the way they wrote it because literary styles had not advanced. But by the time we got to the New Testament, there was plenty of historical writers or plenty of mythology writers. They knew what style they were writing in. They knew they were writing what they saw. So this is a lot. Now, I'm not some great historian. I did the study. I did the reading. You can ask my family. I've been doing this for months now, it seems, to pull up all of this data. But these are every one of these 12 different people outside the Bible, all of them Roman except for Josephus, who did not believe. They didn't turn to Christ. They're still writing down facts. I mentioned before also what I would expect to see if the resurrection were true. I would expect to see people who did not believe to still write about, to know about that. Hey, did you hear about the people talking about this guy who's alive again? He was supposedly dead, and they're worshiping him because they say he came back to life. People would have known about it. They would have been writing about it, and that's exactly what happened here. So I say go read those 4 Gospels. You have enough reason now. Go read those 4 Gospels and see if the teachings of Jesus ring true to what you should say. If you want to say he's a wise teacher, then fine, or study his wise teachings. See if those wise teachings teach you anything, and then ask him. Just say, "Hey, I don't know that you're God, but if you are, I want to know." Because he will reveal himself to you. He doesn't want to hide himself from you. He will say, "Sure, let's talk about it." He will come in your life. If you fervently say, "Teach me, show me," he will do so. He did it for me, and I'm just a wicked man. See you next time. Thanks.